Regular tests show that I don't have an infection, yet I am still in pain. So I feel scared, but I also feel optimistic. My name is India, and this is my UTI story. I want to share my story because I have been suffering for UTIs as long as I've been alive. I was in hospital after just being born, and that's when I got my first UTI when I was 2 weeks old. So this is something that I've been suffering with my entire life. And it's fair to say that I'm really angry about the state of women's health. And I feel that there is a community of mainly women sharing their stories, and that's something that I feel to be very helpful and comforting for me, especially when there are stories of women that have been able to find a cure for their UTI. And I'm somewhat in the middle. I suffer with pain still regularly, but it's not the sort of burning pain that you might associate with UTI. It's my bladder really. It's my bladder that's in pain. So I see myself as being in the midpoint. You know, I'm not in as much pain as some. I'm not as debilitated as some. I'm still able to live my life, but I'm not completely cured either. As I mentioned, my UTI journey began when I was a 2-week-old baby, and I was given antibiotics to clear the infection. Knowing what I know now, I do wonder if the course of antibiotics I was given wasn't enough, and I have bacteria that have developed resistance, but we'll never know. I do feel that there was a lack of education when I was a child. When I was younger, I believed that there was an issue with me drinking too much water, so I actually stopped drinking water because I was in so much pain from having infections, and that led to me being dehydrated, and I only found this out when I was in my 20s and I went to see a specialist. And from then on, I flipped, and I actually ended up drinking too much water, to the extent that recently when I went to see a specialist, he tested me and saw that my bladder was well overextended, and I'm now in pelvic floor therapy to try and fix that. I get really frustrated with sex education in the UK because I feel like there are so many things that we weren't taught that would have been really helpful. Things about voiding after sex, showering before sex. I just feel like there's so much education missing, and for myself, I'm often the first person to talk to my own partners about UTIs because their previous partners haven't suffered from UTIs, which is obviously brilliant for them, but not great for me. In terms of a diagnosis pathway, I have never been formally diagnosed with a UTI. I now live in Mexico, but before this, when I was living in the UK, I was on a wait list to see a urologist, but I was told that that wait list could be up to a year. And as many people with UTIs know, you see a urologist and that might not necessarily mean you get anywhere. I now live in Mexico, where the private system is a lot more developed. It's relatively cheaper compared to the UK, and also my salary is better. So in the past 6 months or so, I've paid around £3,000 in UK money, trying to find a cure for my pain, for my UTI. I wouldn't say it's been completely successful, and I've been met with some of the similar roadblocks that I have in the UK, so a lack of testing, not being believed. In terms of the pathways, I had a cystoscopy. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, I always struggle with that word. I had a test which revealed that when I went to the loo, I wasn't fully emptying my bladder. I had pelvic floor therapy because I was weak in some areas and too tight in other areas, so I'm trying to fix both of those elements. One of the biggest things for me, and one of the things that I found most impactful, was that I was given access to a vaccine, and that for me has been something fantastic. I've not had an acute infection since I started taking the vaccine, and that might be credit to the vaccine, I don't know, but I really wish that a vaccine had been mentioned to me before, especially when I wasn't suffering with UTIs, when I didn't have, or at least I didn't have symptoms of a UTI, because I do wonder if that could have been a preventative method. I have had medicine for lesions which are found inside my bladder. I personally don't believe that to have worked. And I'm also currently exploring acupuncture for chronic and recurrent UTIs. My acupuncturist recommended an anti-inflammation diet, which is something I am looking at. I have pursued a number of treatments across my life, and the most common one was short course antibiotics. That's what I was most often prescribed with the NHS. I have to say that for the most part, this did work for me. You know, the infection cleared up, and it would usually come back within 6 months to a year. And I would argue that that was reinfection rather than an embedded infection. Obviously, I can't ever be sure, but that did work for me up until a few years ago when I had an infection come and it stuck around for months and months and months. That cleared up seemingly by itself, but I did take a lot of probiotics in this time, and I felt really lost because I was in a lot of pain. Recently I've had another infection, which again I was given, I had an infection that was proven by a dipstick test in March, and then May, and then June of this year, and each time I was given antibiotics, and I'm still in pain. So that has led me on to further treatment. Acupuncture is something that I've been doing, which I have found some relief from. I have completely cut alcohol and coffee from my diet. I've been keeping a diary to see what food and drink trigger pain. I've definitely noticed that some trigger pain more than others. I found pelvic floor therapy to be really helpful, not in terms of managing pain, but to know that I am correctly voiding when I go to the loo, and also because I've struggled with incontinence, which is not fun to say when you're in your 30s, but it's true. And I was told many years ago that that was partly linked to my frequent UTIs. I take a range of supplements. I take D-mannose, I take oregano oil, and I take prebiotics. I don't find that these help with the pain, but I do find that they help psychologically. They give me a sense that I am in control of something which so often feels out of my control. And especially the D-mannose, I mean, I take it preventively, but also I'll take it after I have sex. And again, that gives me a sense of control. One thing I do want to look into more is diet and what possible diet changes I could make. I'm not someone who likes to restrict myself when it comes to food, but it is definitely something I'm considering. I also wanted to mention that during a recent flare-up, I didn't drink alcohol for a month, and that was a huge game changer. The impacts of the treatments that I've had, I'd have to say it's been mainly negative because I am still in pain, and I found that to be very frustrating. So after my bladder was inspected and there were lesions found on my bladder, the doctor I was seeing here in Mexico performed a bladder instill, which I found painful, and the medication cost £200, but he told me that this would be a one-off, it would work, and it made no impact whatsoever. And later, when I looked into the medication, I saw that this is something that is often prescribed for people with interstitial cystitis in the UK, and they're given a course of at least 6 instills, whereas I was given only 1. But given that the medication was really expensive for a one-off, we're talking hundreds of pounds, I decided against further treatments in case it might not work. It's been really frustrating because I feel like I've not been believed, and I've been given really invasive treatments that I don't personally view to have helped me, and that's why I'm going down a more holistic route when it comes to things like diet and acupuncture and pelvic floor therapy. That is something that I felt has been lacking from the specialists that I've seen here. One thing that is really positive is that I've spoken to a gynecologist here who is willing for me to send my urine off for testing in the US and then see what those results provide. So to have someone actually listen and believe me is really encouraging, because the other specialist I was seeing just said, well, you don't have an infection. And I was like, well, we don't know that. And that's really frustrating. It's really frustrating not to be not to be listened to. And what I found with the holistic approach, so like I say, acupuncture, diet, pelvic floor therapy, these have all been women, and they have all listened to me, and they have all said they've seen cases like mine, and they validated my pain. And whilst physically I'm not better, psychologically that helps me a huge deal. I mentioned this at the top of the video, but I think what makes my story unique is that I've never met anyone that had UTIs since they were a baby. I think that this has given me some incredible resilience in UTIs. It means that my ears prick up whenever I hear anyone talking about UTIs. It means that I speak to lots of people about it when I hear that people suffer from them, and often people will kind of point their friends in my direction because they're like, oh, India suffers from UTIs, she can help you. And you know, I help them in what I can. I'm not a scientist, but I can talk about my own experience and what's helped me. I also think that my story is interesting because I'm someone who's been on both sides of not being able to afford private treatment and now being able to afford private treatment. When I wasn't able to afford private treatment, I was all about prevention of UTIs as best I can, and obviously we all know that we try as hard as we can and they still happen, but a lot of like reading and research and, you know, just going to the NHS, the National Health Service in the UK as much as I could. And now that I'm on the other side and I have, you know, a bit of spare money that I can afford to see some people privately, I've become quite bullish about my own treatment, and I've been doing a lot of, I wouldn't say arguing, but I advocate for myself. You know, I push back against doctors when I don't feel that my treatment is appropriate, and I do a lot of research. And finally, and I think this might be unique, but I might be proved wrong, now I live in Mexico, I'm doing all of this in my second language. So I found that I have to translate a lot of the resources that I find. And again, I feel this adds to my own sense of being pretty resilient, frankly. So in terms about how having a chronic illness has affected my life, I'm a really active person, I'm a really outdoorsy person, I'm a really outgoing person. And whilst I still do that, I have to be so careful about the kind of activities that I do. So I like going up mountains, I'm a mountaineer, but you know, I really have to think about things like, how am I going to keep myself clean? You know, how am I going to be able to relieve myself? How am I going to have enough water? Do I need to pack certain kinds of painkillers with me? You know, I feel I have to factor all of this in a way that a lot of other people don't have to. It's definitely affected me when it comes to romantic partners. You know, this is a conversation that I have with romantic partners early on. I do feel it's been a pretty good litmus test of partners in terms of how well they deal with this conversation and whether they're willing to support me. So that's been pretty good. And also just, I mentioned this, but the cost of treatment. I've mentioned that I am in a position now where I can afford to pay for treatment, but that is at the detriment of going on holidays, saving for a home. You know, I do feel that this affects my own financial future. I'm someone who'd love to be able to buy a house one day, despite the fact that I'm a millennial and houses are very expensive. But instead of saving, I'm spending money on trying to fix a chronic health condition. In terms of how having a UTI or having chronic UTIs has affected my mental health, I have had to be really careful about spending time in online communities. And I mentioned earlier that these can be really helpful for me. The flip side of that is that I got to the stage where I was reading lots of posts on social media, on forums, and frankly, it was really scaring me. It was making me really quite depressed. Until I spoke to my mum, and she's like, I think you need to come off these groups because, you know, these people are suffering, but that's not you and you're not there yet. So I look to these groups for support, for advice, but I definitely do not, I don't go on there every day because I found that this can be really quite scary. I take supplements daily, and I found that this helps me mentally in terms of feeling like I have a sense of control, even if they don't always lessen my symptoms, and also focusing on things like diet. I just focus on what I can control, because if I focus on what I can control, I do find that this puts me in a better headspace. In terms of what's made a difference for me during my journey, definitely friends and family. They've always believed me, they've always validated me, they've never disputed the fact that I'm in pain and that I suffer with this. They've never apportioned blame, they've never assumed that it's my fault. And that's been a huge comfort because I have had people be less supportive. I had a partner who would insist that we have sex even when I was taking antibiotics for UTIs when I was a lot younger. And obviously that was a horrible experience and not something that's ever been repeated. I would say that Live UTI Free has been a huge blessing for me. I found so much support, and it's really helpful to know that there is a strong campaign group that is kind of leading the fight on this. In terms of how I'm feeling now, regular tests show that I don't have an infection, yet I am still in pain. So I feel scared, but I also feel optimistic. I feel scared that I will be in pain for the rest of my life. I'm scared that it will get worse. I'm scared that I will get to the stage where I won't be able to leave the house and do everything that I want to do. I'm a really active person, I'm a very social person, and the idea of limiting myself because of urinary tract infections, it's something I don't want to do, and I don't want to end up in that position. And that's why, even though it's expensive, I am trying to be proactive right now in fixing, what I have and my own UTI. I was actually, prior to this current bout of infections, I had been UTI free for 3 years, and that was amazing. So it's really annoying, frankly, that the pain is back and that it's been back now for quite a while, but it gives me hope that I can live without pain. It gives me hope that I now have this online community that I feel very dialed into and connected to, and that I'm taking this into my own hands far more than I ever have been. So that does give me some hope. The only other thing I'd like to mention is around sex and the importance of speaking to partners. Having partners who understand that certain behavioural changes, like showering before sex, them voiding before sex, you showering and peeing immediately after sex, just being able to advocate for yourself with partners and with friends if you need to. In terms of words of encouragement, I would like anyone watching this to know that they're not alone. There is a huge community of people that are suffering with this, and together, if we speak up, if we raise our voices, if we pester the NHS, politicians, if we post on our social media, if we talk to friends and family, we will be able to raise some awareness of this condition. And I joke somewhat with dark humour. I joke that I hope that UTIs or chronic UTIs will become the next endometriosis or polycystic ovary syndrome, where there will be a kind of swell of advertising, and then hopefully there'll be some investigation into some kind of a cure that will help the majority of people. And I would advise anyone going through this to talk to people, because I guarantee you, if you speak to friends, if you speak to family, you will find another woman that is going through this. By speaking about it, I have met other women that are going through this, and I find it really helpful just to keep talking about our experiences.
Hi, I'm Jenka from Love. I hope you found this video helpful. There's no single approach that will work for everyone when it comes to health, so I invite you to watch more patient videos here or read more stories over on our website, liveutifree.com, and take what resonates with your journey. Remember, it's always best to consult with a clinician before trying something new. If you'd like to share your own story, please get in touch. Our info is in the description. And feel free to reach out with any question about patient stories, finding a clinician, or your own personal experience. Also check out the description below for more helpful resources. If you find these videos valuable and would like to support what we do, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell button to stay updated when we post new content. Thanks so much for watching and for being part of this community, and remember, your story matters.